This afternoon, around 2 p.m., there was an officer-involved shooting at the 2200 block of 1st Avenue North in Billings. According to Lieutenant Woolley of the Billings Police Department, 2 BPD officers were investigating a suspicious call, which resulted in a foot chase and exchange of gunfire with a 26-year-old Shepherd man. The suspect died at the scene, and neither officer was injured in the exchange of gunfire, and no additional information has been released tonight. But Chief St. John will be holding a press conference tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. at the BPD training facility located at 4810 Midland Road. In national news, President Trump is offering temporary protection for some undocumented migrants in exchange for a border wall. The White House says it's a compromise aimed at ending the month-old partial government shutdown. Democrats say it's a non-starter. Mola Lengi reports from Washington.
President Trump is offering 3 years of deportation protection for some young migrants brought to the U.S. illegally.
I want this to end. It's got to end now.
In return, Congress would provide $5.7 billion for a border wall. Vice President Pence urged Democrats to consider it.
Come to the table in a spirit of good faith. We'll secure our border, we'll reopen the government, and we'll move our nation forward, as the president said yesterday, to even a broader discussion about immigration reform in the months ahead.
Democratic leaders say it won't pass.
It was the president who single-handedly took away DACA and TPS protections in the first place. Offering some of those protections that he took away back in exchange for the wall is not a compromise, but hostage-taking.
Mr. Trump took to Twitter Sunday to vent about the stalled negotiations, writing, "Nancy Pelosi and some of the Democrats turned down my offer yesterday before I even got up to speak."
I think it's a non-starter for him to ask for a permanent wall and for us to have a temporary fix.
Some Democrats hinted at a possible way forward.
What the president proposed yesterday, increasing border security, looking at TPS, looking at the Dreamers, I'll use that as a starting point, but you've got to start by opening the government.
On Tuesday, the Senate will take up legislation to reopen the government that includes President Trump's offer. Mola Lengi, CBS News, Washington.
Some 800,000 federal employees face the prospect of a second missed paycheck because of the partial government shutdown. And joined here now with me is meteorologist Connor Pregitzer, and we're seeing a change in weather.
Yeah, we've got some stuff that's right on our doorstep. We didn't quite see it today, but a lot of other places in Montana feeling the changes already. As we look at the satellite and radar, we can see, I've got the longer loop here so we can see what was happening earlier this afternoon. Building up to now, a lot of this stuff is really light. Not a lot of heavy precipitation reports coming out of it, even though it looks fairly widespread on the radar right now. As we look at the daily precipitation reports, we can see places like Missoula and Great Falls being the heavier spots here today. Again, this is precipitation snowfall. Multiply that by a factor of 10 is kind of the easy way to go about that. So some fairly noticeable snow coming to the western half of the state, and this system is not done with us yet. It's going to pull to the south. It's going to affect our weather coming tomorrow. I'll break that down for us, time it out for you coming up in the full forecast in just a little bit.
Thanks, Connor. Since the Roe v. Wade decision on January 22nd, 1973, some in Billings say pro-life support has grown at marches nationwide. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. It was a time for singing and prayer this afternoon at the 12th annual Billings March for Life. Dozens of people marched down 3rd Avenue North after starting at St. Patrick Co-Cathedral. Once at the courthouse, speakers talked about prayer, the pro-life movement since 1973, adoption and taking care of orphans, and voting for pro-life candidates.
And Montana chose poorly against life. Elections have consequences.
I don't know of a better way to teach our children the spirit of being pro-life than through adoption. Adoption teaches the love of God.
People are standing up for truth, they're standing up for justice, they're standing up for the sanctity of life, and has now become, praise the Lord, with the longevity we see, it has now become a multi-generational concern.
The National Native American Hall of Fame was officially established in 2018. MTN's Zoe Zandora shares the Montana Hall of Famers' stories and where they are headed.
You don't hear a lot about Native American accomplishment, and I think that's important because when you're a child and you're growing up, you look to those people as your role models to say, this is what I'm able to do.
The National Native American Hall of Fame is in its early stages. It doesn't have a home of brick and mortar, just a dream born in Great Falls and spreading to Native peoples all across the country. This past October, they celebrated their first class of honorees.
For our first set of nominees, it took us about 6 months to determine, what's the matrix, what are the factors that we use to decide who is deserving of this honor.
12 Native men and women, including Montana's Eloise Cobell, were inducted at a ceremony in Phoenix.
I was starstruck a little bit. I spent the past 8 months collecting information and learning about all of their achievements.
Now, Hall of Fame staff are already working to select the next class of inductees. They're also working to educate and create traveling exhibits, all while working on the long-term goal of finding its home.
It's going to be a long process before we decide where the home of the National Native American Hall of Fame is, because it isn't just Montana tribes that we're looking at, it is tribes across the nation.
A place where all Native people can reflect on the greatest among them. In Great Falls, Zoe Zandora, MTN News.
In other news, today was the final day of Butte's free winter festival, Snowflinga, and it wrapped up with a number of events. MTN's Medeiros Babb takes us to 2 of the events where it's all about competition and having fun.
That right there is the sound of ski joring, a sport where a horse pulls a skier through a course of turns and jumps, hoping to finish with the best time.
Moves to the big one. Oh, yeah.
This is the first time Megan Lamoureux has seen the sport in person, but she did do a little bit of research before showing up at the event.
We've never watched this. I saw a YouTube video, but it looks really cool, looks really fun, and it just seems really cool.
Even though this was the event's first time in Butte, it brought in competitors from around the world to try for their chance at a share of $10,000.
We are solid!
On the other side of the hill was another Snowflinga event, fat bike racing. Close to 20 competitors gathered behind the M and grabbed a fat bike provided by Derailed Bike Shop and Bad Beaver Bikes. Bear Stillwagon said the best thing about fat bike racing is the ability to stay active all year long.
And what I try to tell people is, I go get my fat bike, I just smile the whole time. It's just fun. You just have fun, and it's not the drag of training like sometimes the summer gets. And like I say, I get on my bike and I smile, and that's what fat biking is.
People were not only competing for the individual events like ski joring and fat bike racing, but for the overall king and queen of the Snowflinga Festival. In Butte, Medeiros Babb, MTN News.
Looks like a lot of fun. Thanks for watching the 10 o'clock news here on Q2. When it comes to farming, spraying for weeds is an essential part of upkeep, but can sometimes be harmful and high in chemicals. In this week's Ag Report, we learn about a new spraying system that's healthier for farmers to use. And later in sports, Scott catches up with Alicia Breen on her interesting transition from first team All-American to first assistant on MSUB's bench. Is she the good cop or bad cop? We find out coming up.
You're watching MTN News with Zoe Zandora, Storm Tracker Weather with Connor Pregetzer, and Sports with Casey Conlon. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.